Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates.
Hello, welcome to the Content Magazine podcast. I'm Daniel Garcia, the cultivator of Content Magazine, and we are here today in our sofa studio with Lauren Dickens. She is the chief curator at the Museum of San Jose. Museum of Art. I forget how to say it.
San Jose Museum of Art.
There you go, San Jose Museum of Art here in San Jose. Yes. So now you have been a curator there at the museum since 2016. Is that right?
That's right. 8 years.
8 years. Yeah. So you've been able to navigate through the pandemic. And Yeah. So I'm sure you're excited to be back open and live and having people around. Did you do a few Zoom shows and programs?
It's actually very much relates to what we're talking about today, because the show that got kind of postponed because of the pandemic was something called Barring Freedom, which was our first collaboration with UC Santa Cruz around prison abolition.
Yeah.
And it's a show that was only open for, I think we got 9 days. We squeaked out 9 days before it got shut down.
Okay.
But it enabled us to pivot into 10 months of online programming. I think we did 13 or 14 awesome programs online, like thousands of people tuning in. Yeah. So in some ways, I mean, we were able to reach even a much wider audience with the doors closed during that. Yeah. So silver linings, as we all say from the pandemic.
Yeah, that is interesting. A lot of people did talk about that they found their organization or what they're doing, that they found a more international audience and a larger audience than they would for their brick and mortar. And so some people are even kind of like, continue to do like dual programming and stuff like that. Yeah.
And around a theme, I mean, in thinking about the theme specifically, because we're talking about prison abolition, which is such a hopeful idea. It's a other way of existing, another way of being, and especially during the pandemic when we're all at home, everyone is isolated.
Yeah.
Doom and gloom and fear. It was really like a hopeful gathering each time. So it was great.
Yeah, cool. So now, let's see. First, I want to just talk about your own personal journey of how you came to be at the San Jose Museum of Art. Like, what's a little bit of, because you were actually, I'd say you're like born in San Jose, but did you spend any time here, or was it?
I mean, I was born here and we moved when I was 2 because I really had a lot of say in that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Moved to Sonoma County, where I grew up, and then I went grew up there, went east for college.
Yeah, okay.
So I've been working in art museums on the East Coast, mostly. I was in D.C. I was at a place called the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which was the oldest museum in the country. It closed.
Oh.
We got absorbed into the National Gallery of Art, which is a wonderful museum, but not a great place for a curator who likes to work with living artists.
Right, yeah.
So it wasn't a great fit. I started looking around, and this position came up at the San Jose Museum of Art. Yeah. And it enabled me to move back, actually, into a house across the street from my grandma.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. So you have family around and stuff like that?
Yeah, my whole family is still here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's good to be kind of home then, right? Yeah.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
We're not leaving California again.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Because you went to Yale, right? Was your, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I did grad school at Columbia. Okay. So we were out there for a long time.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And what drew you specifically to be a curator? What's some of the things that, kind of like...
I mean, I think a lot of curators talk about an unconventional background, but my background was in theater.
Okay.
And not as an actor, but as a light designer. And I got really interested in how the lighting, the staging of an actor can tell so much about the story, right? You turn off the lights, it doesn't matter how cool the actor is. You can't see what's going on. Yeah. But I started thinking about museums in the same way, where how artworks are put together tells so much of the story, regardless of the agency of the artist and what the artwork is doing.
Yeah.
So I got into thinking about museums from there, how they construct and tell histories, how they construct stories of power, in conjunction with an artist agency, but really what the institution does as an interface with an audience in those terms.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I got into it from there, and haven't looked back.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. So then now, so specifically what we're going to focus on today is Seeing Through Stones. which is the exhibit that's currently in 3 different locations. It's with the Santa Cruz Institute of Art and Science, and then their Barrios Unidos, and then also at the museum here in San Jose. And so tell us a little bit of how did that collaboration come together? And how did, a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about specific for the show.
Yeah, so actually, as I mentioned, it came out of this Barring Freedom and the pandemic. So that series of programs that we did online was called Visualizing Abolition. And we all had lots of time to talk and think about big projects during the pandemic, and really started thinking about what a series of exhibitions could be that explored not the harms of prisons, but what artists are doing to take them apart. There's all this work being done in the world by activists and scholars and artists and other people who are actively working to bring into being a world without prisons.
Yeah.
So thinking about bringing that together, and also thinking about working with artists. The role of artists is to help us dream. It's to help us feel and see what we can't think of because we're stuck in our daily lives. So to really get us outside of that, and bringing artists into a conversation with something as big as abolition, what can that do? So I had always been thinking with Rachel Nelson and Gina Dent at UC Santa Cruz. They started this whole initiative at Santa Cruz called Visualizing Abolition that has, they have, it's a degree granting program at the university. Okay. They have internships. It's a much wider sort of pedagogical tool.
Yeah, and they've been doing a lot of different programming with it. And so, and
they have lots of other programming around it. Yeah. But with San Jose, specifically thinking about artists, and what do artists bring into this conversation? What are artists doing that relates to this conversation? And then we also partnered with Barrios Unidos as a community center in Santa Cruz that is run by system-impacted people and for system-impacted people who are really the lifeblood and heart and soul of an abolition movement. You have to be thinking about the people who are most impacted first. So really centering them in the way that they use art and think creatively and think and work with artists in the way that we put the show together.
Yeah, and so then you and kind of Gina Dent and Rachel Nelson, you guys kind of began talking, kind of through Zooms or whatever, and reimagining what could happen, right? And then did you take submissions? Because there's 80 different artists over the 3 different locations, about 80 different artists. 80
artists and collectives, so it's more than that. But counting is very hard because collectives, artists come and go.
Yeah. So then you have, they have roughly the 80. And then you commissioned a 16 different pieces. And then how many are actually in display at the San Jose Museum of Art? Is it 40-ish? And
how many artworks?
Yeah, artworks, or at least artists.
It's more than a third. It's 40, 50-ish.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So then how did you select, and how did the selection process happen for this exhibition?
Well, we started, so we were, Rachel and Gina and I we talked on Zoom, but then we started traveling a lot.
Okay.
As soon as we could. We were in Sao Paulo, we went to the Middle East, we went down to Louisiana, but traveling around and, talking to people and seeing what kind of work was happening to both commission. So part of the, the usual idea of a art museum commissioning is that you're giving artists money to create something new for an exhibition, which is certainly part of what we did here, but we also were working with artists who, they have a gallery practice, so they're showing something in the museum, but they're really engaged in the world outside the museum. So it's also just to fund these other ways of existing in the world, and it's what we could do kind of to support artists in encouraging us and inspiring us to see these other ways to live.
Yeah.
So the way we put the show together is really through talking to hundreds and hundreds of people. There are artists all around the world doing this kind of work. Part of the goal was to get the Barring Freedom exhibition was U.S.-based artists. So we have some U.S.-based artists in the show, but it's not just a U.S. conversation. We're all, if the pandemic taught us anything, we're all connected.
Yeah.
So we need to think globally and dream globally. So a lot of the goal was to also bring in artists from around the world who don't necessarily know the other artists in the show. So we built a lot of networks between artists in that way, as well as bringing them together within the show.
And then, so the artists that are participating, some are incarcerated and some were previously, I guess. But is everybody who's in the show has a personal experience with, like,
not
the prison
necessarily.
system?
They're allies, a lot of allies as well.
Yeah.
It centers on folks who are currently incarcerated, previously incarcerated with lived experience, but there are artists who's, affect their family members.
Right.
There's artists who affected their friends.
Yeah.
There's artists who know that we're all connected and it affects all of us.
Yeah. So now for you, were you already thinking about kind of like the state of the prison system within the world before this kind of came, or was this kind of like once you started doing stuff with Gina and Rachel that kind of like got you aware of it? Or
yeah, I'm very new to this. This really comes from the deep decades-long work that Gina in particular, and Rachel have been doing around prison abolition. So it was through conversations with them and really thinking, when we started, Institute of Arts and Sciences didn't exist as a building, so they didn't have a space.
Okay.
So part of it was, we at SJMA, we like to work with partners, and we like to elevate and give platforms to great community work being done that doesn't otherwise have a space. Yeah. So that's how it started, is I asked them to guest curate a show. That was the Barring Freedom exhibition, which actually wasn't Gina, that was Rachel Nelson and Alex Moore. But they guest curated that, so I wasn't involved. And it was through that the conversations really started about what's the role of an art museum in this conversation.
Yeah. So then what would you say, what is the role of an art museum in this conversation? What have you found out?
I think it's really artists. We take all of our cues from what artists are doing, and there are so many artists who are very concerned about social, political issues that are happening in the world. And it's not to say that we're putting artists, in the galleries to make a statement in lieu of the institution making a statement, but it's thinking with these artists. It's giving them space and funds to produce something that shifts their practice in a way. Okay. I mean, one of the first commissions that we did as part of this was with Sky Hopinka, who is an indigenous filmmaker. And we asked him, he hadn't made a work that was connecting the boarding schools, the Indian residential school boarding schools, which could be thought of as sort of the original carceral system in this country. Yeah. But he hadn't done any work around that. So we asked him to think about that as it relates to abolition in his own terms, in his own practice. Yeah. And he did some research around Alcatraz and made this incredible experimental kaleidoscopic colors, really vibrant film, thinking about what if when you came through the bay, you saw Alcatraz as Indian land, not as a prison. How does that change your whole way that you think about the U.S. land and history? Yeah. So it was through those conversations, very eye-opening for me. Yeah. And that's the role of an art museum.
Yeah. So I guess, globally, there's like 11 plus people that are incarcerated around the world. And with kind of like the prison abolition kind of like movement, I'm okay, I don't know anything about it. I've been watching I saw a couple kind of like documentaries of like how they're trying to do, more, have prison systems being more kind of like with rehabilitation, giving people different kind of thing. Very fascinating, and I never have thought about the prison system that much. I don't have a lot of personal experience with it. So for you, what has been, and maybe you could tell me too, what is kind of like you think the solution or the direction that the possibilities to reimagine it? What are some of the things that you've kind of discovered through this kind of exhibition and the process of putting it together?
I think one of the main things that we thought about is, and just like you said, what I realized is how much I didn't think about it, how much, for many of us, it's the prison system exists. You take it as a given, and you move on. And it's not natural. It isn't something that has to exist. So in, a deep dive and spending time with people who've been thinking about this for a long time, but also with artists really can help us see, other ways of being. And in some ways it sounds silly because I've been a curator for so long and I've worked so closely with artists for so long, but in working in this project, it really clicked that artists are not, they're not just producing something to put in a museum as an object that we see on Saturday.
Right.
And then go back to how we were living before. But through the way that they live in the world, they're really changing it. And that really hit home through this. So in, putting their skills and their creativity in loosening the bonds that hold the prison system in place. Yeah. It's so simple, but the imagining, opening us up to the possibility that there could be something else. It's not necessarily, and I don't know that all of the artists in the show have a proposal. This is not artist as problem social solver kind of
policy makers.
Right. They don't have we should do this instead. But in their practice, they're investing in other sorts of structures, communal care, different forms of medicine, different forms of support. Artists in, Sion Dairit in the Philippines, for example, is working with farmers to plant food instead of cash crops. Jackie Summel is an artist who works out of New Orleans who has been in direct collaboration with a lot of incarcerated people. And with them, through a gardening project, she's planting and growing medicine. And then these incarcerated individuals design medicines that she distributes through an apothecart. So in effect, these people who have been accused of harming society, then through the medicine are healing society. Yeah. So it's just entirely opening us up to other ways.
So it's just more about the artist is like giving the platform to look at a problem or a situation with a lot of different imaginary eyes and stuff like that. Just like when you would read a science fiction book, right? Where they were thinking of the future, and yet now we're seeing some of those things coming possible. So that's what you see. The role of artists in culture is to dream and to think and kind of like look at the problem from different ways.
In the present. Yeah, and it's not necessarily future. Yeah. We pulled from, so the title, Seen Through Stone, is from an Etheridge Knight poem, which was written in 1968 while he was in prison. Yeah. But he's talking about seeing through the walls of the prison. Yeah. So we kind of took that as a prompt to think about what does a world without prisons, if you can see through these walls, what does that world look like? Because until we can imagine that, how are we going to get there? Yeah, that's cool. Well, talk about that. So the show specifically, you had said when we did an interview with you a couple months ago or last year, you said like the role of curator is to ask the questions before the audience kind of comes. So what were some of the ways that you put together the show and the exhibition that were kind of like trying to answer the questions that somebody might have before they come into the exhibition? There are so many questions, I think, about prison abolition. So one of the things that we really consciously did is made a show that is not it doesn't rely on the normal sort of representational tropes that when you think about shows around prisons, a lot of them rely on figurative representation of, the biographies and the stories of incarcerated people.
Yeah, right.
And we really strove to make it more about the system of incarceration and the landscape rather than any particular individuals. Yeah. So there was, a constant negotiation with among us. We're three curators too. Yeah. We don't have identical viewpoints. Yeah. But in thinking about how to make sure our audience understands that it's grounded in the prison as a building. Okay. There is something that we're talking about here. But we also, the more you show the bars, the more they get sort of reified as normal and naturalized because we're so used to seeing them. Yeah. So talking about prisons but not showing the bars, that kind of unwires something in the way that we're used to thinking. Yeah.
Was the role, in some ways, even though you're talking about the prison system, but was it also then, I guess, to kind of, rehumanize the prisoner and their experience in some ways, or was that part of it, or is it more just like, hey, this is what's happening let's question a better way to do it or a different way to do it? What would you say?
I mean, we're really focused on we're really focused on the world without prisons. So
Okay.
we're not trying to kind of rehumanize people
Okay.
who are in prison. They are humans.
Yeah.
If we just take that as a given, which I think we all should.
Yeah.
What do their visions of freedom look like? So
Yeah.
one of the kind of the central curatorial projects, let's say, of this was, Gina and Rachel have been working. Gina's been working in prisons for a long time, so she reached out to her networks of incarcerated individuals, and we asked them in an open call, in a world without prisons, everyone could see the sky.
Yeah.
So many incarcerated folks don't get to see the sky except through bars or wire for years, decades,
Yeah.
sometimes. So in a world without prisons, everyone could see the sky. What does the sky in a world without prisons look like? And we asked them to make us images.
Yeah.
And we got over 50 submissions from around the world. So they're from Australia, Brazil, and then all over the U.S. And we have them at each of the venues and they're sent individually. So it's an individual vision of freedom, but we put them together to form this collective vision of what a sky could look like from the perspective of people who are currently held in these prisons.
Yeah.
And that for me is sort of a metaphor of that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah, I think you get that too. I was there on the opening night, and you do get a sense. Yeah, there's definitely the theme of sky and kind of like being able to look out comes through. And I mean that with Etheridge's Night's poem, right? I mean, he talks about the sky even in that too. So I mean, was that poem then? Did you guys kind of think in terms of that poem and then kind of put on the show together, or was it just kind of one of those happy things were coalescing at the same time?
We sort of joke about the many metaphors of abolition because in some ways it's an abstract concept.
Yeah.
There's an idea that abolition is an absence. It's an absence of a prison. But it's additive. Abolition is the addition of healthcare structures and social structures and caring for one another. It's the addition, education, all of these other things that make prison's totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
So we have all of these different metaphors we're thinking through, including the ocean, the sky. Constellations was an early way of thinking about the show. The globe is kind of knit together through these carceral structures, but resistance around the world also knits us together. So sort of recalibrating the way we think about the togetherness sort of globally. And then seeing through still on that just kept popping up again and again because everything felt, once you start talking about liberation as a very vague term, it can mean anything.
Yeah.
So really trying to make sure we stayed grounded in the prison. And as you mentioned, Etheridge Knight talks about under prison skies. I mean, it's very specific what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that is cool. I mean, I really like that, the metaphor and the sense of that, because even though they're on the wall, there's like something written there. I think there's a poem on, I think some of his poems.
Yeah, there's one stanza from his poem.
Yeah, it's like written on something. And I remember just thinking about my own personal experience of being in different countries and stuff like that and thinking like, oh, this is the same sky that you see back here. And it's such a common factor for humanity is the same sky.
Yeah.
For you, what are if someone's interested in coming by, hopefully everybody is, what's something that you say, I want you to see this and notice this? What would be some kind of like picks or tips that you would say if they're going to go to the San Jose Museum of Art for?
I would say, well, the kind of jaw-dropping piece in terms of experience is a work by Charles Gaines. And the tip is you have to have patience.
Okay.
It's a piece sort of in the back gallery area, and you go in and you see the wall is covered with these huge panels that replicate some of the legal arguments and documents around the Dred Scott trials. Yeah. So not the decision of Dred Scott, but some of the trials leading up to it. They're kind of handwritten out in the roll. So you're sitting there and you're looking at all of this information about this incredibly ultimately racist decision that the Supreme Court made, and you're looking at these arguments for how it came to be, sort of how
the thinking process,
and the legal process that so much defines our country, how it got reified, racism got reified in that. But as you're scrutinizing it, the lights start fading. And at first you're like, what's happening? What's happening? But it slowly fades, and it becomes an image with LED lights of the starry night sky. It's an image from the Hubble Space Telescope. So you're suddenly confronted with, the celestial sky is in some ways our definition of what we can't fully comprehend, right? It expands beyond what we know. So we're really confronted with the limits of how we construct meaning and the limits of our own imagination. But it's a great experience, but it takes a minute. So, it's on a 7-minute loop. Some people walk in and out. And they miss it. But that's also, that's a life lesson. If you spend 30 seconds doing something, you probably didn't get the full full experience. Yeah, totally.
Well, I heard someone saying that the average viewing from an artwork or something like that is like 3 seconds or something like that. And and they were saying like the role of the artist is to get someone to stay for 7 seconds. It's like double it,
So this is 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
But it requires, we can't instantly question why we construct meaning. That's not how we are as humans. This is not how social media society works, right?
Totally. You need to have time to go through the process for transformation. Right.
So that one's really kind of experiential, intellectual. Another one that I would just point out is work by Sable Elise Smith, which is a neon piece at the front. And it's a poetic work. So she has this poetic stanza about a world in which, I'm going to butcher it. It's a beautiful poetic stanza, but it's neon. So you look at it, you read it, and think about it, but then you realize then as you turn away, your retina has shifted from viewing the neon, and it changes the way you see every other work in the show. And Sable thinks very deliberately about neon as this material that is sort of insidious, but we don't recognize it, that it's sucking power from electricity that could be used for something else. It emits this subtle buzz that we don't really notice bothers us until we turn it off. It has a drain. It makes your eyes hurt, but you don't quite notice that either. So it has all these negative effects on your body, but they're so subtle, you don't notice them till they're gone. And that is also a metaphor for prisons.
I love that. I love that how artists they're so curious, and then they study and they get fixated, fascinated, and exploring some kind of thing like the neon. Like as you were explaining, it was like, that is the experience of it, but I never took the time to dive into it. What is in this process from seeing the different artists, was there there was stuff that were able to fit in and some that didn't. Was there anything that you were kind of like, I really was moved by this that isn't a part of the exhibit that you would want to let people know about?
I mean, we have time. So a lot of it is, working with artists, and we have museum timelines wherein we need to have things shipped by a certain date.
Totally.
And artists don't always adhere to that. So some of the commissions we didn't get fully developed. So some of them didn't end up happening. We had a full commission with an artist named Shilpa Gupta, but she just didn't have time to complete it in the time frame. So we have a different piece by her in the show, which is still incredible. But there are a number of examples like that, or a couple great collectives from Brazil who do have work in the show, and it's great work, but given more time, it could have been even more.
Well, that's the thing. It's the tough thing. No matter what you're doing, any kind of project, right, you have you kind of formulate the ideal already in your head, and then of course you have to adjust and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to say anything bad about somebody left out, but is there anything that you were just like, I wish this would make? Is it, you're saying some of those commission pieces are in that line? Some
of those commission pieces are in that line, but it's also, when we're talking about, this is a really different kind of show in that the goal of the project of Seeing Through Stone was not necessarily objects in an exhibition. It was to create all these networks for people out in the world, for connections, and to introduce people. It's really to kind of foster these creative networks that continue to flourish outside of the exhibition. So Seeing Through Stone is, I think, an incredible experience, a totally overwhelming experience of all of these really deep practices that are happening, but it's not the end of anything. They're we all struggle with perfectionism and the idea that we did it.
Right.
There is the show about abolition done.
Yeah.
But it's not done.
Yeah. Is there some other program that you guys have? I mean, I know there is other program that's going along with this exhibition to help kind of people engage with the work. What's some of the stuff that you're going to be doing?
Yeah, we have artists. Well, there's an artist talk tonight, which is Sophia Karim, who's an architect. She trains as an architect, but has been working in collaboration with some political prisoners in Bangladesh and India. So we have artist talks come and kind of talk about their practice, both as an artist and an activist, and that's a kind of a constant conversation that comes up of how do you balance. And I have to say, each of these artists deal with that very differently.
You mean deal with it just in their own personal like journey, not. Yeah, okay. Go.
Like whether they're separate. So Sophia works as an architect. She works at an architecture firm.
Yeah.
It's not an activist, I guess, architecture firm. She's, drawing kitchen designs. And then she also works as an activist. Okay. But some artists really, bring their practices together. I mentioned Sian Diary, but he works with tapestries, and he made a tapestry recently. He works with the land back movement in the Philippines, and he made a tapestry about a recent event in Tinang in the Philippines where a bunch of activists and farmers were arrested. And he made the tapestry for the show. It's in the exhibition, but then he emailed me and asked me to send a good photograph of it so he could do a big blow-up to use in a march.
Oh, okay.
So these things, function in different spaces.
Yeah, that's cool. So for you, who was like a major influence in your life to kind of like grow as a curator, or be a curator? What would you say? What was a person that kind of you followed or read?
I think that's a really, personally, just a very hard question for me. Artists. Yeah. I think it's conversations with artists and just like pulling little bits of wisdom sort of as I go. I loved collaborating with Rachel and Gina on this, and I think we all challenged each other's thinking just about how to make a show about a topic like this. Yeah. So it's those sorts of kind of collegial experiences. I never had a mentor, and people talk about this super fulfilling mentorship they had. I never had one of those.
No, that's cool. But so I mean, I guess the thing is like, so just as you're engaging with different artists, it's constantly formulating the way that you do your practice then.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say my mom is not in the arts at all. She is a retired English and math teacher, but she's in her 70s, and she is constantly open to learning new things and trying to think about things differently. Yeah. And we talk a lot about mind-blowing discoveries that you just made. So, that's just really encouraging.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. What gives you joy right now in your life, just on a personal level? Well, let's do two. Let's do personal level and like professional. So we'll start with the professional and then move to the personal.
This show has been incredibly rewarding to work on. Part of the project I mentioned, we kind of created all these networks. So we were in Sao Paulo. This was last year now. But one of the artist collectives that we're working with, O Grupo Entierro, which is a Sao Paulo-based collective, hosted a dinner where they invited all of these prison abolition folks who they've been working with who didn't know each other to a dinner. So it was 60 people or something of this 7-hour-long dinner where all these folks got to meet and share their stories and kind of build connections with each other to further their own work. Yeah. And to be, to be able to do that, it was funded by the project. So to be able to be involved in something like that as a learner, it's incredibly rewarding. Yeah. So it's been it's challenging, it's emotional, but it's been incredibly deeply rewarding as well.
So was that dinner was kind of like you guys brought those people together as part of?
Well, I say we didn't.
After
the artists. No, this was last year. So it was as we were developing the show.
Yeah.
And some of the artists from that meeting are in the exhibition, but it wasn't the curator. You know, we don't. This is not our knowledge base necessarily. It relies heavily on the local.
The people doing
knowledge
the work
makers,
there.
the people doing the work on the ground and building connections that then they can use to further their work when, you know, the museum isn't supporting it anymore.
Yeah.
But building something that really exists outside of our walls and beyond us.
Yeah, so that made a connection, a community, and a network that hadn't existed before, and that's going to go on even after the exhibition's over.
Here in San Jose, we are helping build networks in Sao Paulo, not with San Jose, but in Sao Paulo. Yeah. Amongst each other, which is incredibly cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Now, for you, then on a personal level, what's given you joy in your life?
I mean, I've been gardening.
Awesome.
I have 2 kids, and school ended on Thursday.
Oh, yeah, okay. Does that bring joy or trepidation?
No, it does. We've been out in the garden, planting tomatoes, and I love working in the garden.
Yeah. So. Have you always been a gardener, or is that something that's new? You always have green thumb, or is it something you always wanted to do, or did you grow up on a semi-farm in Sonoma?
I grew up in the Redwoods in Sonoma County, maybe in the shade, so nothing grew. So I do enjoy being in the sun where we can grow vegetables and tomatoes and things. Yeah. Eat kale salads from the garden. Yeah. It brings me great joy.
Yeah, that's good. That's cool. Yeah. Is there a book that you've read recently, either fiction or nonfiction, that has kind of inspired you or has been fun to dive into?
I guess the most recent book that I just finished was Abraham Verghey's The Covenant of Water. Okay. Which is an epically long novel, 5 generations or something of a family living in Kerala in India, or several families. I listened to it on my commute, so 47-hour kind of audiobook. Yeah. But it's just cycles of life. Okay. And it was a nice... It's a beautifully written book. It has all kinds of interesting things happening in it. But this idea that, you know, you think of a protagonist as being a main character in a book, and this, precedes the protagonist by 30 years and then continues 30 years after. And just thinking about our own, we get so hung up in our own now struggles, and there's a lot of life before and after us. Yeah. So it's nice. It's been nice to read in the midst of maybe our political...
Sure, yeah. What's happening in this dot of timeline that we're on. So a Covenant of Water, you call it?
Mm-hmm. Abraham Verghey's.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, cool. Okay, well, let's see. What's some last things that you want to talk about the exhibition that we maybe haven't covered that you would want to, drop in there?
I'll just drop in a kind of a plug for another program that's happening in June, which is we have 2 artists in the show who use music. There are many other artists who use music in thinking about abolition, but Maria Gaspar and Guillermo Galindo both have objects in the show that could be considered sonic objects, and they are going to be activating them. Okay. Maria Gaspar is... actually working with a collaborator, but she works in Chicago, and she collected the debris from the demolition of the Division I Cook County Jail. Okay. So the bars, the iron bars, and the bricks when the jail was taken down. And she's in the exhibition, they're casting glass. So these tools of confinement are made into windows. Yeah. But in this performance activation, she actually uses the bars, the iron bars, and they use them sort of as a musical instrument. Oh, wow. And there's just this conceptual, this idea that, when you strike an iron bar and it makes noise because the metal is vibrating, right? Right. The vibrating particles means they're moving. So this bar, this iron thing that we think of as so solid and fixed, you hit it and it moves. Yeah. So she's going to be activating those.
When's it?
I wasn't gonna say this online because
it's all right. It'll be June, online. We can find it online.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, cool.
And then Guillermo Galindo, who is known for work where he kind of collects the detritus along the U.S.-Mexico border from the desert, and he brings these really charged tires, bicycle wheels, things, and he makes them into sonic instruments that he then activates, and they resonate with that history.
Yeah.
So taking these materials that are evidence and cast off from really carceral systems, but activating them to do different things, to have different lives, and transforming them that way.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about
Yeah, that sounds really fun. Yeah, that's good. So, and then now the current exhibition, Seen Through Stones, is going to run through January 5th, right? And so there's a lot of opportunities to go multiple times to experience it. Go one time just for the 7-minute video, go another time for the activation, the sonic activations. And
their performances, there's a lot of other events
right.
too.
Yeah, that's good. Cool. Well, thank you for being a part of this and letting us know a little bit more about the workings to putting together this exhibition and what's going on. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the South Bay creatives. This episode's music is 408 by Jack Pavlina. Follow him on Spotify and also on his Instagram at Jack Pavlina Music.